They didn't arrive with money. They didn't arrive with stability. Most didn't even arrive with more than a single suitcase. But they did arrive with recipes, handwritten, memorized, whispered across docks and dinner tables, dishes that would one day turn a handful of Miami streets into the beating heart of Cuban America. When the first major waves of Cuban immigrants reached Florida in the 1960s, the homes were cramped, the jobs were low-paying, and the future felt like fog on the horizon. But the kitchens, the kitchens, stayed bright. Pots simmered, pans crackled. The same flavors that once drifted across Havana's Malecon now wandered down Calle Ocho, pulling neighbors in like the scent of home. These meals weren't just food. They were survival. They were resistance. They were the bridge between what was lost and what could still be built. And little Havana. It didn't rise on storefronts or politics. It rose on tables, on flavors, on the quiet power of a community that refused to forget who they were today. We're uncovering 25 Cuban immigrant meals that built little Havana. Dishes born from longing, laughter, tight budgets, and big dreams. But before we get to the famous sandwich, you should know the story of a stew that carried an entire generation through their hardest nights. 1. Ajiaco criollo, the stew that traveled without a suitcase. If there was one dish that made the journey from Cuba to Miami on nothing but memory, it was Ajiaco, a rustic, hearty stew older than the island's oldest house. Every Cuban family had their own version, every abuela had her own secrets, and every immigrant arriving in the 60s carried some piece of it in their hearts. Ajiaco wasn't fancy. It wasn't expensive. But it was everything. It mixed root vegetables like malanga, yuca, plantains, corn, pumpkin, and whatever small bits of meat a family could afford. The stew simmered all afternoon, thickening into something that tasted like warmth, dignity, and stubborn hope. When Cuban immigrants reached Miami, many discovered that American supermarkets didn't sell all the ingredients they were used to, so they adapted. Potatoes stood in for malanga. Chicken replaced beef shank. Plantains came from the lone Latino market miles away. But the spirit stayed. Ajiaco became a Saturday tradition in cramped apartments across Little Havana, a pot big enough to feed everybody who knocked on the door. It wasn't just a meal, it was a reminder. You may have lost your country, but you did not lose your flavor. And just when families thought Ajiaco couldn't mean more, a new dish arrived that tasted like celebration trapped inside a crispy shell. 2. Ropa Vieja, the shredded memory of home. Before Little Havana had cafes buzzing with Café Cubano, before the pastel-colored ventanitas filled the streets, many Cuban families survived their first months in Miami on a single pot of Ropa Vieja. Shredded beef stewed in tomatoes, peppers, garlic, onions, and spices until it became pure comfort on a plate. Back in Cuba, Ropa Vieja was a Sunday dish, a celebration dish. The kind of meal you cooked when the whole family squeezed around the table, laughing louder than the radio. But in the early immigrant days, it took on a new role. It became the bridge between before and after. Meat wasn't cheap in Miami, jobs weren't steady. Some families used flank steak, others used cheaper cuts that needed hours of slow cooking. But as long as the pot simmered, the apartment smelled like the home they'd left behind. The name, Old Clothes, came from the shredded texture, but for many exiles, it meant something deeper. They'd left everything behind, clothes, furniture, photographs. Yet here they were, rebuilding their lives with the flavors they still carried. Saloons in the West had their son-of-a-gun stew. Little Havana had Ropa Vieja, a dish that told every newcomer, "You aren't alone, you're among your own." And just when families thought the nostalgia couldn't get any stronger, the next dish arrived with the aroma that filled every hallway in Little Havana's early apartment blocks. 3. Moros Cristianos, the rice that united a community. This was the first dish many Cuban immigrants cooked on American soil. Why? Because it was affordable, filling, and tasted exactly like home. Black beans and rice simmered with garlic, onions, bell peppers, cumin, and bay leaf. In Cuba, Moros Cristianos symbolized centuries of cultural blending. In Miami, it symbolized community. When Cuban families opened their doors to neighbors, especially new arrivals who hadn't found work yet, this was the dish served without hesitation. A giant pot could feed 10 people for the cost of a single bus fare. Some early Miami landlords joked, "If the hallway smells like cumin and beans, a new Cuban family just moved in." They weren't wrong. Moros Cristianos wasn't just food. It was a welcome mat, a common language, a soft landing for people who'd lost almost everything. And in the middle of all that generosity, another dish quietly became the unofficial breakfast of Little Havana's working class. 4. Pan con bistec, the sandwich built by sweat. Before the Cuban sandwich conquered Miami, pan con bistec fed the workforce. Tough, thin-cut steak pounded tender, seasoned with garlic and lime, then fried and stacked with onions inside soft Cuban bread, construction workers ate it before sunrise. Bus drivers grabbed it after long shifts. Mothers packed it for husbands trying to juggle 2 jobs. In the early days, meat was expensive, so immigrant families stretched it thin. 1 steak, 3 sandwiches. Nobody complained. The garlic, onions, and crispy edges did the heavy lifting. Street vendors and small cafes popped up all over Little Havana, selling pan con bistec for a couple of quarters. You didn't need English to order it, you didn't need money to enjoy it. You just needed hunger, the kind that comes from rebuilding a life from scratch. But the next dish? That one arrived in Miami with the scent of celebration, and it changed Little Havana's kitchen forever. 5. Picadillo, the weeknight hero of Little Havana. If there was one dish that kept early Cuban families afloat during the scrappiest, most uncertain years, it was picadillo ground beef, cooked with onions, garlic, bell peppers, tomatoes, cumin, olives, raisins, and sometimes potatoes. When payday was still a few days away, picadillo was cheap, it was quick, and it was endlessly adaptable. A lifesaver for families juggling long shifts, English classes at night, and a brand new world they hadn't asked for but now had to conquer. Some people scoffed at mixing raisins with meat until they tasted it. Then they understood. The sweetness wasn't accidental. It was a reminder that even in hard times, there was still room for joy. In the packed early apartments of Little Havana, the smell of picadillo drifted through open windows, up stairwells, and across balconies. No matter whose kitchen it came from, the aroma carried the same message. We're surviving, we're adapting, we're still us. And just when you think picadillo was the most important skillet in the neighborhood, here comes a dish that kept entire families fed for almost nothing. 6. Arroz con Huevo, the humblest meal with the biggest heart. Before Cuban restaurants lined Calle Ocho, before pastelitos were sold on every corner, there was arroz con huevo, white rice topped with a fried egg, usually with the edges crisped in a little oil and the yolk dripping like gold. For new arrivals with almost no money, this dish was survival: 1 bag of rice, a few eggs, a dash of salt, maybe a little butter if the paycheck stretched that far. But here's the beautiful part. Even though arroz con huevo was humble, families sat down to it with pride. Parents told their kids, "Esto te va a poner fuerte." This will make you strong. And it did, because it wasn't just food, it was a lesson in resilience. A reminder that even the simplest meals could carry a family through dark days. Many kids who grew up on arroz con huevo still smile when they see it today, because it tastes like being cared for. It tastes like home, no matter how far they traveled. But Little Havana didn't stay simple for long. Soon, Cuban bakeries began filling windows with pastries that brought crowds from every block. 7. Pastelitos de guayaba, the sweet that made Miami Cuban. If there is one scent that defines Little Havana, it's this: fresh pastry dough, sugar caramelizing, and warm guava paste melting in the middle. When Cuban bakers arrived in Miami, they brought with them the memory of pastelitos, flaky pastries filled with guava, cheese, or both. But in the 1960s, Miami had nothing like them. So immigrants baked them at home, sold them from small storefronts, or delivered them to neighbors fresh from the oven. This wasn't just dessert. This was celebration wrapped in dough. You brought pastelitos when a new family arrived. You brought them when someone got a job. You brought them to say, "We made it through another week." Before long, people weren't just buying the pastries. They were buying a feeling, hope, pride, a little sweetness in a tough new world. And right when pastelitos started defining the neighborhood, another dish arrived, one that simmered slowly, patiently, filling every corner of Little Havana with the smell of Sunday afternoons. 8. Frijoles Negros, the pot that never left the stove. In every early Little Havana apartment, no matter how small the kitchen or how old the stove, there was almost always a pot of frijoles negros simmering gently, not just for dinner, but for tomorrow's lunch, next week's visitors, and the neighbor who just lost his job. Black beans were cheap, reliable, and comforting. But Cuban black beans? They were something else. Slow-cooked with garlic, onions, cumin, oregano, olive oil, bay leaf, and a touch of vinegar. They tasted like patience, memory, and home. All at once, parents taught their children the secret. You don't rush frijoles. In Miami, that lesson became a metaphor for rebuilding a life. Some families added a little sugar. Others added green peppers or a dash of wine. Every version was different, but every bowl said the same thing. We are still connected to the island. And when times got hard, when rent skyrocketed, when work dried up, when you missed Cuba so much it hurt, a bowl of black beans with rice could settle the heart better than any medicine. But while frijoles fed the soul, another dish kept the celebration alive in the streets of early Little Havana. 9. Arroz con pollo, the immigrant party dish. This wasn't a weekday meal. It wasn't survival food. This was the dish you made when something good finally happened. A new job, a cousin arriving safely from Cuba, baptism Sundays, or a birthday that needed joy even on a tight budget. Arroz con pollo, chicken and rice cooked together with sofrito, peas, sometimes beer, and that unmistakable golden color from bijol or saffron. The whole pot turned the color of sunshine. Early Cuban families often couldn't afford saffron, so they improvised with annatto or homemade seasonings. What mattered wasn't the ingredient list, it was the feeling. This dish filled entire rooms with laughter. It turned neighbors into family one pot, 20 plates. No one left hungry, and no celebration in Little Havana felt complete without the smell of arroz con pollo drifting out of a doorway. But when it came to late-night comfort, the kind that carried bus drivers, nurses, and new arrivals working double shifts, another dish took first place. 10. Café Cubano, the shot of strength that built a neighborhood. Technically a drink, but in Little Havana, it's a meal, a ritual, a heartbeat. Cuban coffee didn't just wake you up, it kept you going. Immigrants pulled 12-hour shifts, studied English late at night, worked weekends, sent money back home, and still kept their spirits alive with tiny cups of Café Cubano, jet black, sweet as caramel, powerful enough to snap fatigue like a twig. At the start, families brooded on cheap stovetop espresso makers. Then the ventanitas appeared, little walk-up coffee windows on Calle Ocho serving coladas for $1. A single colada could fuel 6 people, and you always shared it with co-workers or neighbors. You weren't just buying coffee. You were buying belonging, and with every sip, the neighborhood grew stronger, louder, and more alive. But now we move from the drink that powered Little Havana to the pastry that turned mornings into magic. 11. Pan Cubano, the bread that meant everything will be okay. When the first Cuban bakeries opened, the lines wrapped around the block. People cried when they tasted the bread. No exaggeration, Pan Cubano had returned. Long, soft, airy, slightly crisp on the outside, made with a touch of lard and baked fresh every morning. You bought 2 loaves, One for today, one for the cab driver who lived downstairs, one for the neighbor who just got here with nothing but a suitcase. Okay, that's 3 loaves. But that's how Cuban generosity works. Fresh Cuban bread turned tiny Miami apartments into real homes, toasted with butter, dipped in hot coffee, stuffed with anything you had. It was the backbone of little Havana mornings. But just when bread and coffee seemed unstoppable, a dish arrived that tasted like both comfort and coastline, a reminder of the island's ocean breeze that many had left behind. 12. Yuca con Mojo, the root that carried a people. Before Miami supermarkets carried Cuban staples, before Latin aisles were even a thing, early immigrants searched every corner store for yuca, a starchy root that tasted like home long before Miami felt like it. And when they finally found it, you could hear cheers in the neighborhood, boiled until tender, drenched in Mojo criollo, a sauce of garlic, sour orange, oil, salt, and a hint of cumin. Yuca con Mojo was simple, but it carried emotional weight. This was the flavor of holidays in Cuba, the flavor of grandparents' kitchens, the flavor of island sunsets. In Little Havana, families made Mojo in old recycled jars, shaking them until the garlic hit just right. You served Yuca con Mojo at Noche Buena, dinners, baptisms, political gatherings, and whenever a new family arrived from the island shaken and exhausted, it said, "Sit, eat. You're safe now." And after that comforting dish, another island staple made its way into Miami kitchens, one that tasted like the countryside itself. 13. Tostones, the crunch of the Cuban countryside. Before Pastelitos and Croquetas became street corner favorites, the earliest Cuban immigrants leaned on a snack that reminded them of simpler times. Tostones, green plantains, sliced thick, fried, smashed, and fried again until golden and crisp, salted while still hot, served with garlic sauce if you had it, or just eaten straight off the plate if you didn't. Tostones were the snack of farm workers back in Cuba, the merienda of schoolchildren, the side dish of family barbecues. So when Cuban families fired up their tiny Miami kitchens, this was one of the first flavors to fill the room. Kids loved them. Parents relied on them. Neighbors bonded over them. They were cheap, filling, and familiar, the perfect immigrant food. But while Tostones brought crunch to the table, another dish brought comfort, especially on nights when homesickness hit hard. 14. Sopa de Pollo, the cure for everything, expanded version. Ask any Cuban who lived in Little Havana in the 60s and 70s, ¿Qué te salvó cuando estabas enfermo? They won't say medicine, they'll say sopa de pollo, Cuban chicken soup. A light golden broth filled with tender chicken, potatoes, fideo noodles or rice, carrots, and a bright splash of lime. Not just a meal, a remedy, an emotional reset button. Parents made it for sick kids. Neighbors brought it to widows. Church ladies delivered giant pots of it to newly arrived families who had nowhere else to turn. In the quiet kitchens of early Miami, this soup did more than heal the body. It healed the heartbreak of migration. It warmed people who were cold from fear, loneliness, or memories they couldn't talk about yet. And for many, the first sip tasted like an invisible hand on the shoulder saying, "You're going to be okay." And as thousands of new arrivals found comfort in sopa de pollo, another dish emerged as the star of the Sunday dinner table. 15. Lechon Asado, the flavor of every celebration. If one dish could define Cuban gatherings, in Havana or Miami, it's Lechon Asado. Roasted pork, marinated overnight in garlic, sour orange, oregano, and salt, cooked slowly until the meat fell apart and the skin turned glassy crisp. In Cuba, families roasted whole pigs in the backyard. In Miami, they adapted early immigrants' roasted pork shoulders in tiny ovens, in makeshift roasting boxes, even in metal drums turned into grills. What mattered wasn't the method, it was the flavor, that citrus garlic marinade, that soft meat, that crunchy skin. Every holiday, every graduation, every successful escape from Cuba, Lechon Asado was there. It wasn't just food, it was community spirit served on a plate. And just after the pork was carved and shared, a dessert always followed, one that tasted like childhood no matter how far you'd traveled. 16. Flan de leche, the sweet that survived every border. Before Little Havana had pastelito shops on every corner, before Cuban bakeries became landmarks, there was flan, the dessert that every abuela could make with her eyes closed: eggs, sugar, milk, vanilla, 4 ingredients, infinite memories. When Cuban families first arrived in Miami, fresh ingredients were expensive, so they leaned on canned milk, evaporated and condensed, both affordable and shelf-stable. The result? A flan that was silkier, denser, sweeter, and uniquely Cuban-American. Early Little Havana apartments often smelled like caramelized sugar cracking on the bottom of an aluminum pan. Flan was the dessert you brought to every gathering. No invitation needed. You just showed up, smiling, holding that wobbling gold treasure, and every time the spoon tapped the plate, it was a reminder. We still have sweetness left in our lives. But as flan cooled on countertops, another classic simmered across dozens of kitchens, a dish that tasted like Havana street stalls and late-night cravings. 17. Croquetas de jamón, the bite-sized lifesaver. Croquetas weren't just snacks, they were strategy. Fast, cheap, filling, and perfect for feeding unexpected guests, which Little Havana always had plenty of. Made from a thick bechamel mixed with finely ground ham, shaped by hand, rolled in breadcrumbs, and fried until golden brown, croquetas became the default breakfast, lunch, or emergency dinner for Cuban immigrants. Early Cuban cafes in Miami sold them for pennies. Kids grabbed them before school, workers ate them on the bus, neighbors offered them whenever someone walked through the door. They were a symbol of Cuban ingenuity. Take very little, make it taste like plenty. And the beautiful part? No two families made them the same way. Some used leftover ham, others added a hint of nutmeg, but everyone agreed they tasted like comfort wrapped in crunch. And right next to the croquetas, another bakery classic rose to fame. Though it wasn't sweet, it was every bit as beloved. 18. Pan con tortilla, the breakfast of survivors. At first glance, it's simple. A warm Cuban loaf, a thick, fluffy egg omelet, sometimes plain, sometimes with onions or ham. But for Little Havana's earliest residents, pan con tortilla was the breakfast that fueled the grind. It fed mechanics, it fed seamstresses, it fed new arrivals headed to job interviews with English they barely spoke and confidence hanging by a thread. Some people joke that pan con tortilla built more Miami rooftops and paved more roads than any other meal, because it was the cheap, filling, reliable breakfast of the workforce. It was the sandwich you ate standing up, rushing out the door, praying the day would be kind. And for many families, it became the taste of early morning hope, simple, warm, and enough to keep you moving. And when breakfast was done, families turned to a hearty comfort that brought the countryside right into their kitchens. 19. Vaca Frita, the crispy cousin of Ropa Vieja. When Cuban families had leftover flank steak, a luxury back then, they gave it a second life as vaca frita, shredded beef marinated in lime, garlic, and salt, then pan-fried until crisp on the edges and juicy inside. It sizzled loud enough to call the whole family to the table. Vaca frita was a triumph in the immigrant kitchen. Nothing wasted, everything transformed, flavor first, always. Early Miami cafeterias began selling it with rice, beans, and onions piled high. For many Cubans, one bite tasted like old Havana taverns, noisy nights, and the smell of frying garlic drifting down the malecon. It was the kind of dish that made even the toughest week feel worth it, and in Little Havana, its crackle in the pan became the soundtrack of Sunday afternoons. And just when diners thought they had enough beef, in walked the dish that would become the king of Cuban Miami lunches. 20. The Cuban Sandwich, Miami's edible flag. The Cuban sandwich wasn't invented in Miami, but Miami perfected it. Early Cuban immigrants brought the memory of this pressed ham, pork, cheese, pickle, mustard sandwich with them, but it was in Little Havana that the modern version was shaped. Why? Because Cuban bakeries finally recreated the perfect pan cubano. Cafes pressed sandwiches in noisy grills, wrapping them in paper and selling them to construction crews, bus drivers, and new arrivals who needed a cheap, hearty lunch. The Cuban sandwich became a symbol, warm, crisp, melty, and impossible to forget. It told the world, Cuba is here. Cuba is alive. Cuba is building Miami. You could hear the crack of the bread all the way across the counter, and that first bite always felt like a handshake from home. Even today, elders say you can judge a whole cafe by how they press their sandwich. It's that serious. But while the Cuban sandwich fed the working class, the next dish fed the heart, especially on Sunday evenings when families gathered after church. 21. Arroz Imperial, the Sunday showstopper. If there was one dish that made early Cuban immigrants feel rich, even when their wallets said otherwise, it was Arroz Imperial. This wasn't an everyday meal. This was the crown jewel of the Sunday table. Layers of yellow rice, shredded chicken, peas, pimentos, and a shockingly generous layer of mayonnaise holding it all together, baked until firm and sliceable like a savory Cuban lasagna. In Cuba, it was festive. In early Miami, it became a statement. No matter what we lost, look at what we can still create. Families saved this dish for baptisms, birthdays, home blessings, and those precious Sundays when everyone was off work at the same time. The first slice always went to the oldest person in the room, a quiet thank you for the sacrifices that brought the family to the U.S. And when Arroz Imperial was gone, there was always a pot of its simpler cousin waiting in the wings, a dish that filled stomachs during the hardest years. 22. Arroz con picadillo. Picture it, a mound of rice, a scoop of leftover picadillo, maybe a fried plantain if the week was good. This wasn't glamour. This wasn't celebration. This was survival, the weeknight fuel of thousands of Cuban immigrants working double shifts and trying to stretch every dollar. Early families called it the plato de apuro, the emergency plate. Fast to make, cheap to cook, comforting every single time. It filled lunchboxes for new arrivals working janitorial jobs. It fed kids doing homework at the kitchen table. It kept the fridge from feeling empty when money was tight and rent was due. And here's what made it special. No two plates ever looked the same. Every family added their own twist. Extra olives, no raisins, more sauce, less meat, turning scarcity into flavor. And when people needed more than comfort, when they needed strength, they turned to a dish born from the Cuban countryside. 23. Fufu de Platano, the mash that carried generations. Long before Miami supermarkets carried frozen maduros, early Cuban immigrants mashed ripe plantains by hand to make fufu, a creamy, sweet-savory dish mixed with garlic, onions, and sometimes bits of pork crackling. In Cuban homes, fufu was the glue that held meals together. In Little Havana, it became a lifeline, a side dish that could turn even the smallest amount of meat into a full plate. Families joked that fufu filled your stomach and fixed your mood, because after a few bites, the exhaustion of starting life over seemed just a little easier to carry. It was warm, it was rich, it was unmistakably Cuban. Some elders say the secret was in the mashing, the rhythm, the strength, the love poured into every plantain, and kids grew up remembering that sound, knowing dinner was coming and everything was going to be okay. And right beside the fufu, another staple showed up at almost every dinner, reminding families of the island's coastal bounty. 24. Bacalao a la Vizcaína, the immigrant's ocean on a plate. Fresh fish was expensive in early Miami, but bacalao, salted cod, was cheap, preserved, and familiar Cuban immigrants soaked it overnight to remove the salt, then cooked it with tomatoes, potatoes, capers, bell peppers, and olives. This dish carried the taste of Cuba's fishing towns, where salted cod was a lifeline for families during hard times. In Little Havana, it was the same. You served bacalao on Fridays, on Lent, On paydays when fresh meat wasn't in the budget, or simply when homesickness hit like a wave. It was the immigrant ocean, right there on a plate. The smell alone could pull a memory out of someone. A coastline, a childhood kitchen, a grandmother's voice telling stories as the pot simmered, and even families who never cooked anything fancy cherished its patience. Soak, cook, wait, breathe, remember. And when all was said and done, when families needed one more reminder that they had not lost themselves, the final dish brought that assurance in every bite. 25. Natilla, the dessert that whispered, "You're home now." Expanded version, creamy, cinnamon-dusted, served warm from the simplest ingredients every Cuban family always seemed to have tucked away somewhere: milk, eggs, sugar, and cornstarch. Natilla was the dessert of love and survival. Mothers made it when they couldn't afford anything else. Grandmothers made it when they wanted to spoil the kids, and neighbors made it for new arrivals who showed up on their doorstep, pale, frightened, and still shaking from the journey out of Cuba. One spoonful, and the whole world softened. The fear, the sadness, the exhaustion, everything melted away just a little. For many Cuban immigrants, Natilla wasn't just dessert. It was reassurance. A quiet whisper saying, "You survived. You're safe. This land can be home, too." In cramped Miami kitchens, people stirred Natilla slowly, almost gently, as if the act itself could restore hope. And when they served it in tiny bowls with a sprinkle of cinnamon on top, it felt like someone had turned on a warm light in the middle of a dark room. 2 extra sentences as requested. It reminded families that sweetness could survive even the hardest crossings. And for the children of Little Havana, Natilla became the taste of a new beginning wrapped in the memory of the old one. Little Havana wasn't built by politicians or developers. It wasn't built by money. It was built by meals, humble, sweet, savory, and shared by neighbors who offered a plate before they offered their name. By families who rebuilt their lives one pot of beans at a time. If this journey brought back memories, or taught you something new about the heart of Cuban America, hit that subscribe button. Here, we don't just tell history, we keep it alive.